My name is Robert Walker. I'm an accountant and insolvency practitioner, and this is the 9th in my series on managing insolvency in troubled times. In this session, which is the 9th session, I'm going to begin to deal with the mechanics of Part 14, compromise. As I've said, I'm not dealing with Part 15, which is another way of achieving compromise. This is only to do with Part 14. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to display the section. There's one section, Section 229 of the Companies Act, that in actual fact governs most of the needs for a compromise. Okay, so you can see, I've put it on there as a display, you can see what it's saying. I'm not going to go through every detail of it, I'll do that progressively. At this stage we'll just deal with the contours of what is stated. So I won't read the entire section because, as I say, it's very long. So if you look at it, what it is saying is in two parts, basically, subsection 1, subsection 2. And it says that proponents must compile, in relation to each class of creditor, that term class of creditor, important, a list of creditors known to the proponent. Known creditors who would be affected, a third qualification, which is they are to be affected by the proposed compromise. And then it says that the proponent will put together a list and determine the number of votes for each one in classes, as I said. Then of course you get subsection 2, and it sets out the various documents you need to create and how you undertake the voting and things of that nature. Quite clearly there must be, to make this work, a proponent. Now in this case, as I've said, we're not going to deal with other potential proponents, which would be liquidators, receivers, shareholders or creditors, only directors, because that will be 99.9% of cases for small to medium-sized companies. Now there is a tricky issue, a difficult issue, inherent in section 229, which is the reference to class of creditors. It tends to imply that there is more than one type of creditor, and I think that in the past that has been the vexed question that has fatally undermined the compromise process for the better part of 120 years. And I have, since reading the Bank of Tokyo and Solid Energy case, come to a completely different view as to what that might mean, but I'll deal with that at a later date. Now, what is quite critical here is that the proponent must put together a list of known creditors. What that does not mean is creditors that the director is aware of. It is people who are creditors who the director should be aware of. It's very, very important to understand that distinction. Known creditors are to be contrasted with creditors who may be unknown, and I will deal with that apparent wrinkle later on, but there is a class of person who would be an unknown creditor, and I will suggest a method of dealing with such people. Now, very simply, if you've got a good set of records, and I would strongly suggest that everybody attends to the quality of their record keeping if they're even going to consider a compromise, it would be very simple if you've got a completely accurate set of records for you to push the accounts payable button on your program, whether that be Xero or MYOB or whatever it is, and produce the list of creditors, and it should give you the amount that you owe. In addition to that, there will be potential creditors who are not included in the accounts payable. That'd be bank overdrafts, taxes payable, hire purchase. They might be there, but it's unlikely they will be. So you need to take both what's directly on the balance sheet and that which lies under the accounts payable control figure sitting on the balance sheet, and that will give you your list of creditors. You then need to consider whether they are in different classes, and we'll deal with that later. So then it's simply a mechanical exercise of putting them into a spreadsheet into their classes and working out the voting rights. Now, I won't deal with voting at this stage. It's actually determined by Section 230 of the Act, and it refers to the 5th schedule. But we'll get to that later. Now, you need to be very careful here. There might be some problems for companies in trouble. They frequently don't have good record keeping. So that would present the first problem. As I've said, it's not the creditors that you do know about that subjectively you've arrived at and you think that those are the creditors. That isn't correct. It is what you should have known. So you need to be very careful with that. If you've got inadequate records, do something about it quickly. Secondly, you might have disputes with creditors. Well, there is no ready solution to this. Frequently, the only people who know whether there is a valid dispute or not is the supplier, and the customer being yourself as the company. You just have to sort it out. You need to probably point out when you do the preliminary informal negotiation to begin with, to say to these people, well, you might have a point, you may well be contesting in a liquidation, in which case whether you get anything is another matter. Let's agree a number now and get it in writing, and that will form the basis to that person's value as a creditor. Now, as I've said, there are things such as unknown creditors, and to give the show away, but those people will be people who may be contingent, to use that term rather loosely, but there are quite clearly other people who are not unknown but have complex obligations. The case in point in Bank of Tokyo and Solid Energy was there was a restoration obligation imposed on Solid Energy, which Justice Winkleman said would crystallise if it was liquidated, and that is probably true. But when this had to take place and how much it was going to be worth was actually quite difficult to work out. That is the sort of known creditor which is a complex creditor dependent upon some future outcome. You will notice that section 229 refers to estimates, right? Now, that's very important because in the case of a restoration claim, if you're a large coal mining company such as Solid Energy, knowing when and how much will be difficult. So you therefore need to establish a process for determining estimation. Right. Now, the other requirements of section 229 sets out, as I say, a set of documentation that you require, which will be reasons for the compromise, various pieces of information about why the company is in difficulties, what interests the directors have in the compromise, and so on. That all needs to be put together as a package along with the voting forms and such on. So, now, that it needs to be understood will be sent also to the registrar, not just the creditors. And the registrar will put that documentation onto the relevant page of the registrar's website, which means it is completely public. It's semi-public, of course, if you send it to all the creditors, but it's now completely public because it's now on the website. If you are worried about a loss of privacy, well, that's going to happen. If that is so overwhelmingly worrying to you, then compromise simply isn't for you, because you simply have to become open, to be transparent and honest. I say a maxim should be that loss of privacy is a small price to pay for survival. Now, I won't go into any great detail about what these documentation requires, because I'm going to actually do a worked example later on which will show what you have to do. Now, the sorts of things that are necessary is you have to identify the proponent, you have to give their contact details, you have to set out the notice, then the voting process, and an important issue is this: you are obliged to deliver the list of creditors. Now, the list of creditors has the name. It doesn't necessarily have the contact details of the creditors, but it certainly has the amount that they're owed. Now, some creditors may find that alarming One of the issues in a case that I mentioned earlier in this series was to do with Pacific Airlines, which was a large airline that failed 20 years ago or so. And what had happened is that some of the creditors didn't want to be revealed. They were so exposed to the airline that their suppliers and various people interested in them probably would have realised that they also were so exposed they're probably insolvent as well. So there was a loss of confidentiality for creditors. Now, I'm assuming that in the small to medium size enterprise that shouldn't pose a difficulty like an airline falling over, which is a very large thing. So just be aware that creditors will have some of their information revealed. You're not obliged to give their names and contact details of those creditors, though most creditors can be found by their name, though it might be worthwhile considering giving the contact details to the creditors so they can discuss the compromise proposal amongst themselves. Now, my recommendation is to do that, but only after you have ensured that the creditors are happy for you to do that. Shouldn't be a problem if they're commercial organisations, because their access details will be readily available. Now, you would be very careful about doing that to employees, for example, who would also be creditors. So that's as far as I'm going to go at this stage with the mechanics of compromise. It's a series of issues that I have brushed over. For example, who is a creditor? What is a known creditor? Who's an unknown creditor? How would you go about determining what classes of creditors are? Some of the issues that you need to deal with are what are the terms of the compromise, which of course is completely free form, it can be almost anything. What are the consequences of it? That's more difficult to deal with because they can be quite far-reaching, and one of the other issues is what are the interests of the directors. Now, for example, a clear interest of the director in the company not falling into liquidation is that the director won't be sued if the company's not in liquidation, because there's no provision for it. Well, the director's about to sue himself, but the creditors don't have the power to sue him for reckless trading, for example, and nor does the liquidator, because the liquidator doesn't exist. Then another critical issue is how do you vary the compromise as it unfolds? If you've got a debt rescheduling rather than an equity swap, that may be important. Is what happens if it becomes evident it's not working, then you need a process to either to stop it or to allow it to carry on. So I'll have solutions to those various problems in the forthcoming sessions. Please, if you wish for written material, look below the video and you will find ways to acquire it. Thank you very much. Bye.